Well, welcome to this last session. Lucky last. Probably one of the more important sessions, particularly given recent history in South Australia, the closure of Holden and so on. Defence is going to be growing very fast in the next few years, and this session is going to be talking about the defence industry more than just combat roles. I have three presenters with me. Amanda Selway from Raytheon Australia, Brodie Ryan from Techport Australia, and Penny Johnston from TAFE SA, who has actually followed the instructions we were given about preparing for this and has prepared a set of overheads, which she will present to you in a little while. Before we start, I just want to say I was rung up last night by a survey firm, and they wanted to know about who I was going to vote for at the next election, state election. And they asked me 4 questions about what did I think was the most important issue for South Australia. Did I think it was jobs? Did I think it was economic growth? Did I think it was X, Y, or Z? And one of the things that struck me when I was thinking about this session is that the defence industry hits every single one of those buttons. Whichever one we consider to be the most important, the defence industry is an answer to all of them. So it's an important industry for South Australia. And what we're here today to do is to talk to you a little bit about you being a part of it. What I'd like to do first is ask each of my co-presenters how they got into the industry, and in particular, whether their pathway, their history, but in particular whether there were alternate pathways that they might have taken to get into the defence industry. So first, I'm going to ask Amanda.
Hi. So I had a fairly standard entry into defence. I was finishing school, didn't really know what I wanted to be doing, so I went to uni and did a management degree. And then after that, I knew I wanted to get into a big business, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to get into. I hadn't targeted defence as such. I applied for a role with BAE Systems, which was, as it turned out, well above my experience levels and well above anything that I would be able to get as a new graduate from uni. So funnily enough, I didn't actually get that role. But a couple of months later, I did actually get a call from them and was offered a 6-month placement with them. And 10 years later, I was still there, and I was in a completely different career path than I had started. I started in HR, so I started as an administrator, which was a really good entry point. I got to know a lot of people across the business. I got to learn a lot about what the business did without, too much risk, other than the fact that I was in a 6-month placement role. And from there, I just kept taking risks. So defence is quite interesting. If you're willing to take a risk and you're willing to put yourself out there and work the hard yards, you can try anything you want. So I ended up moving into a project management role 5 years after starting in a HR role, and it was the best thing I ever did. It was completely out of my comfort zone. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing for about the first 6 months, but then managed to get it under control and managed to deliver my first project. And I've worked for defence ever since. So, fairly standard.
Thank you, Amanda. One of the things I think that comes through in what Amanda was saying is that there's a perception, I think, that if you want to get into defence, you have to do an engineering degree to get there. And Amanda is a great example of someone who works in defence that didn't come through the engineering route. Brodie, on the other hand.
Yeah, very much the engineering route, you could say. So I grew up in Mildura in country Victoria. I moved to Adelaide to go to university. When I was doing year 12 in Victoria, I probably didn't quite know what I wanted to do, but I knew I liked maths and I knew I liked sciences. So I ended up, sort of the natural choice was choosing to study engineering. So I moved across to Adelaide and I did a bachelor's in computer systems engineering, double degree with a Bachelor of Finance at Adelaide Uni. And then following that, looked for positions. Again, like Amanda, I guess I looked to take some chances. So I went for a job with a small consulting firm that did some consulting into BAE, actually, at the time. And I got a call about 2 weeks before Christmas in 2009, saying that the work wasn't there and he wasn't going to be able to put me on. So I was quickly looking for jobs. And at that time, Raytheon were advertising for the Air Warfare Destroyer program. That's obviously stationed here in Adelaide. And in February 2010, I got a call up and said I'd got an interview and ended up getting a job with Raytheon on the Air Warfare Destroyer program. So I guess I was always interested in defence. I think it was always something that I got excited by. I guess it was the chance, the cutting edge technology and the chance to play with big items of equipment, and also the element that what you're doing contributes to the national security of the country. All those sorts of things always enticed me and drew me towards defence. So it was always something I looked to do. And during my final years of uni, I should say as well, for anyone that's looking to get into defence, a good way to do it is through placements and work experience. So I did some work experience with a company called Tenex Defence out at Mawson Lakes at Techport, who are now part of BAE Systems. So that's a great way to get into the industry as well. On AWD, on the Air Warfare Destroyer program, I've held a few different roles now, requirements engineering, system safety. So looking at the ship and making sure that all of the various systems are safe, and things like the gun can't fire on the bridge and that people are safe whilst doing their job. And recently moving into a role in communications. So I'm now looking after the team on the program that looks after all of the networks and the closed circuit television and the satellite communications, including the Foxtel that the sailors get to watch while they're sailing around, all of those sorts of things on the ship. So the team that sort of designs those systems, builds them, and then gets out on the ship and integrates them and tests them. So that's what I've been doing.
Thank you, Brodie. I think one of the things that Brodie mentioned was the cutting-edge nature of defence. If you want to play with toys that are at the cutting edge, then, and they're big toys too, aren't they?
Yep.
With 3,000 tonnes worth of toy.
Yep.
Then, playing on the Air Warfare Destroyer is probably the equivalent of the new jumbo jets. They are massive, great things. Our last speaker is Penny Johnston from TAFE SA. Penny and I don't work in the defence industry. We work with the defence industry. And Penny has got some overheads that she wants to show you about some of the aspects of the skills that can lead into a job in the defence industry, and particularly those that TAFE SA has to offer. So let Penny just set up here for a second.
Thanks very much, John. So there's a large variety of jobs and career opportunities that are coming our way in South Australia, and we at TAFE are very keen to be ready for it and to be informing as many people as possible about the wide variety of career opportunities. Building submarines, frigates or offshore patrol vessels is very complex, and there's going to be a large number of people in a variety of jobs. One of the things you will be hearing more and more about is engineering, welding and fabrication. There'll be hundreds of welding apprenticeships, and shipbuilders will likely advertise those apprenticeships. What we're trying to encourage school students at the moment to do is get into Certificate 2 programs in engineering, so they're positioning themselves well to put their hands up for apprenticeships when the major shipbuilders start to advertise those. So here at JobX there are a number of major shipbuilders, ASC, Austal, Naval Group, Navantia, BAE Systems are here. So if you're interested in apprenticeships, it's probably a good place to start and talking to them. Something that we're realising more and more with welding is that there will be very, very high skills required. Welders will probably be required to be tested to the international welding standards and do repeat tests to show that they've got that high level of skill. So what we really want to emphasise is that welding for shipbuilding is a really high quality, high craftsman type role to have, and encourage people who've got that manual dexterity to get into the industry, and probably fairly well paying roles in welding as well, which is something to consider. Something that we're seeing in welding, and we believe we will see across many, many job roles in shipbuilding and defence, is virtual reality and augmented reality technologies. This is just an example in welding where in training up welders, we're now starting to use augmented technology where they've got the goggles on, they've got some coupons there, they use a fake stick, but they're getting instant feedback on the quality of their weld. And we think we'll see more and more of this type of mixture of augmented reality, virtual reality in the digital shipyard approach to the projects that are coming online. Jobs in electrotechnology, jobs for electricians will be increasing as the builds advance to more developed stage. There'll be a high need for electricians. Obviously, in terms of the projects, you know, they need to build the hull and some of the main steel parts of the vessels first. But once they're in place, then there'll be a lot more work for electrical skills. Some of the new skills that electricians will have to wrap their heads around are things like submarine battery technologies. And it's the Certificate 3 in electrical apprenticeships will be the pathway to becoming an electrician in the shipbuilding industry. Also, electricians can branch out into electrical instrumentation and control. There's Certificate 3 and Certificate 4 programs in that area. And we've also got Certificate 4 in electrical instrumentation. So obviously the instrumentation and control systems in submarines and frigates are very, very important to the operation of those vessels. So one of the things we want to emphasise is no matter where you're working in the defence industries or shipbuilding, you're going to have a role that is integral and vital to the operation of the vessel in the end. And I don't know if that's something that the panellists would like to comment on, that feeling of being part of something bigger.
Oh, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. Even, sorry.
Go.
Even internationally as well. You know, some of the projects we're doing aren't just Australia-wide. My last project was for the US, and that was assisting the Australian Army as well. But it really feels like you're part of a community and you're part of that, and it's quite cool. It's quite fun.
There is there's a sense of excitement. I don't know how many people have had a chance to get out to Techport, which is the shipbuilding precinct out at Outer Harbour. So you go to Port Adelaide and then you keep going for about another 10 minutes down the peninsula and you'll get to Techport Australia, which is where ASC and Raytheon and the AWD project and the Collins-class submarines are all housed out there. That's home for those projects, and there's quite a buzz around the precinct. And even driving down the public access road, you can get to the end and you can get a good look at the air warfare destroyer. You can see the ship there. There's thousands of people out there working every day, and a number of milestones, I guess, over the past couple of years now. The first time the first ship was floated off, so we're building three air warfare destroyers out there. The first one is with the Navy now. And the first time that ship entered the water, and then the first time she went to sea, and then delivery to Navy in sort of the middle of this year were all pretty big moments and very proud moments for all the people that you get a sense of you are a part of something bigger out there with the Navy involvement. There's people in uniform, Navy guys and girls walking around the shipyard all the time. You see them, it's a good feeling, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another area is electronics. So we have a number of electronics programs. We have currently apprentices and trainees at DST Group in electronics, and we're anticipating there will be further opportunities opening up in the shipyards in relation to that. TAFE also has associate degrees in electronic and electrical engineering. They're 2-year associate degrees that then pathway into university programs with 2 years credit in your 4-year university program in engineering. Not sure, John?
Yeah, I think one of the important things about the associate degrees is that if you didn't get the maths at school, that the full engineering programs at university require, these provide an excellent pathway because the maths is built in to the associate degree. At university, the 3 universities have now agreed on a sort of a standard of maths methods in order to get into a full Bachelor of Engineering degree. Maths methods, as my Year 11 son will tell you, is not easy. And so if you don't get that and you still want to get into engineering, these provide an excellent pathway for that.
Another area of importance which sometimes is not thought about is heating, ventilation, air conditioning and refrigeration. When you think about it, obviously very important in submarines, in confined spaces, to get that right for the comfort of the sailors on the frigates and the submariners on the submarines. Keeping submarine batteries from getting too hot is, I understand, an art in itself, and something that you could probably specialise in if you're really interested in that. Again, heating, ventilation, air conditioning and refrigeration, all vital to the effective operation of these vessels.
The American Navy will tell you that if you don't keep these submarine batteries at the right temperatures, they actually explode, which is why we don't use lithium-ion batteries.
So before these projects get to the stage of heating, ventilation or cooling and even welding, there's obviously the design component. So what we believe is there will be a huge demand for design skills, so CAD skills, computer-aided design, 3D, 2D. There are a number of software providers that are providing 3D tools and systems, such as Dassault and Siemens, which they're actually providing a complete digital shipyard in 3D form. And so we believe these projects will be utilising those kinds of systems, and that there's really a strong need for large numbers of people to be able to utilise these systems. At the moment, we work very closely with the Department of Defence and the Department of Education, Children's Development and ASC on something called the Defence Industry Pathways Program in schools. So that advanced technology project puts students through CAD design and they 3D print their submarine and frigate designs, and it gives them a bit of a taste of what they might go and do. A lot of them go on and study engineering at university, but what we'd also like to see is large numbers of students in our Diploma of Engineering Technical, which is really going to focus on the design elements that are required for these builds. One very important area is information technology, programming, cybersecurity and simulation. We've got a number of programming initiatives going. In particular, we're working with St Patrick's and Saab to actually start training in programming in schools. That will lead to Certificate 4 in programming and internships with the company. And we see starting these programs in schools, starting them as early as possible, and working with the defence companies to get internships, to get that practical experience as soon as possible, is something that's going to be very valuable. Not sure if the industry colleagues would like to comment on the internship aspects of programs.
We really like getting the interns in because we can have a bit of fun with them. So not that we're using and abusing you, but we really like getting them in because they come up with some of the really interesting ideas because they ask all the questions. So not only that, but we actually often do provide roles to the interns when they come in afterwards. And so, you know, you come in for a 6 months experience, you come in for a week experience, we get to know you, we get to know a little bit about you. And even in a year's time, if you apply for a role, someone remembers you and someone is able to say, yes, they're someone worth hiring. So you can't beat an internship.
Yeah, I agree. Like we've had a number of people come through our team over the years, and I think probably 2 or 3 of them now are working on in the company on the project, and they're just the enthusiasm they bring and the different ideas, as Amanda said, and the experience they get. You know, they get to walk around a shipyard and interact with people and attend all the meetings, and they get a really good sense as to whether it's something they would like to work in. and at the same time they get the experience and you get to write it on your resume, and all those things are beneficial. It's a win-win. I don't think anyone loses out of internships.
I would say that when you then get onto university, then internships are part of the course, both in the information technology and in the engineering. In fact, in engineering, you cannot graduate without doing at least 12 weeks internship. At Flinders, we have a 20-week internship, so the whole of your 6th semester is spent in industry. Partly that's because that's what industry wants, but partly also we find that when our students come back after 5 months in industry, they come back with a level of maturity that they certainly didn't start with. I remember being at a workshop a few years ago where we asked industry, what is it that you actually want universities to produce? And they said graduates with 8 years experience, which we're not really in a position to do. But we do try, all the courses that are defence related do their hardest to try and get you into industry. And our experience is that industry is very willing and very eager to take students on work integrated learning work placements, partly because they get to try before they buy. About half of the students end up going back as a full-time employee at the industry that they did their work placement at, and then the other half need to try harder.
Cybersecurity is something that we have been hearing more and more about, but it's likely to increase, and we already know that there are skills shortages for those people with cybersecurity skills. TAFE currently has an advanced diploma in network security, which pathways into the university cybersecurity courses, and I understand Flinders, John, has a Bachelor in Network and Cybersecurity Systems. In relation to screen and media studies, we've had a game art program for some time at our Adelaide City Arts campus, but we've been working with Rheinmetall recently to develop a diploma in simulation and training, which will start next year, and that's actually using game art skills to produce graduates who can work in the defence industry and who can actually model and develop videos and content for the Defence Forces so that they can train their people in how to use these systems. So we think there's quite a bit of potential there, and we're very pleased to be working with the defence industry directly to be developing that qualification. If you're interested in the Diploma in Simulation and Training, I can provide you some further information after this session. Also, leadership and project management is very much something that we see as being very important. In our experience, there are quite a large number of apprentices who work their way up in shipbuilding by doing additional courses, doing project management and leadership style courses, and the fact that they've done apprenticeships, that they've done trade training, then holds them in very high regard because they've got that kind of base level technical understanding when they do go on to management and leadership roles. Would you like to talk about leadership management in that context at all? Amanda?
I can touch on it, I guess. Yeah. I guess once you're in an organisation, it's particularly a bigger organisation in defence, like a lot of the companies are, there's always opportunities, there's always new projects, people are moving around, there's always a chance to move into a leadership or management position, and there's always a chance in your current position to take on a role of leadership and management. There's always things that can be done better. And all you have to do really is speak up, and someone will be looking to do something better, to do something cheaper, to do something faster. That's sort of what the industry is about. So giving our warfighters the cutting edge in all aspects and getting it out so they can use it as quickly as possible. So there is an opportunity, and I was given an opportunity pretty early on in my career. There was a chance to move into a management role, and I took it, and I got to move on from there into project management, and that's sort of how my career progressed. So there's no end to the scope of opportunities to be a leader or a manager within the industry. And again, the Defence Forces themselves are very strong in the leadership and management pathways. That's what they're really good at. So that's one part of the industry that's structured quite well. Is if you want to lead and manage, you'll be set.
Yeah.
Thank you. So just finally, a bit of a theme that emerges is the career and training pathways. And this is an example of what we're doing with St Patrick's. St Patrick's is a P-Tech school which is teaming up with Century Engineering. So you can start a Certificate 2 in engineering at St Patrick's. You can pathway into an apprenticeship on leaving school, or even get a school-based apprenticeship. And then you could do an associate degree in engineering with TAFE and pathway into degrees in engineering at any of the major universities, including Flinders University. So having these pathways for numerous careers in the defence industry is something that you'll be seeing more and more of, and we'll be working hard to ensure that the pathways are delivering the graduates that the defence industry needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Our three presenters, I suppose just to round it off, I should introduce my pathway as well. I went to university in London and then came out to Australia and got my master's and PhD, and now working at Flinders Uni as head of engineering. But I did spend 6 months on sabbatical at DSTO, and what that showed is that the need for the defence industry is full spectrum in terms not only of the different disciplines that it needs, but also the different qualifications. You can get a job in the defence industry with a Certificate 3-4. They are also looking for people with PhDs and are actively recruiting people with doctorates to work on research problems that the defence industry needs. And I think it's that discipline breadth times depth that makes it quite such an interesting industry to work in. Okay, I've got a few more questions, but if anybody from the floor wants to ask a question of the panel, then please put up your hand, and there's a roving mic, and we'll go to you. And if you can't think of anything, then I've got lots of questions, but we'd much rather hear your questions.
Hi, my question was, we only touched on the areas that young students can sort of get into after school. Is there anything for people that are already in different disciplines that might be able to transition into a role in defence? And we haven't really sort of talked about a pathway that might work for them.
Okay, I think there's two parts of that. One is there further education that you could get that would lead to a job in defence? And are there pathways for people who already have the qualifications? And in particular right now, I think there's a strong focus on people who have perhaps worked at Holden's and so on to transition in. Amanda?
Yeah, being in defence, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. You don't have to know the entire Defence Force. You don't have to know the ship inside out. You can come into a role, a project manager is a project manager, and I'm not a technician. I don't come from an engineering background, and I'm still working in defence, and I love it. But, you don't have to have any specialist defence skills to be working in the role that I'm working in. You don't have to know how to use a CAD model to work in the role that I'm in. I can't push the project management TAFE courses more. I think they're absolutely fantastic to get you in, even if you want to be a lead technician. The skills that they give you and some of the tools and the tips that they give you are really, really handy. And they're seen, the certificates are seen really, really well in defence if you were wanting to do extra study, but it's not necessary. You don't have to be a specialist in defence to work in defence. It's very transferable. We have media people, they use Facebook and that sort of thing. They don't know anything about how to use a CAD model and that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's very easy to transfer your skills into it.
Sure, thank you.
Actually, that leads on actually to the question I was going to ask if you hadn't asked yours, which is that some people don't necessarily want to work in defence all their lives. They don't want to commit to saying, I'm working in the defence industry. And I suppose a question for the three of you, how transferable are the skills that the defence industry needs outside of the defence industry? Brodie?
Yeah, from an engineering point of view, the skills and management, the skills are very much the same. You're talking about estimating projects, you're talking about managing the scope, managing risk. Managing risk is a big one, obviously. And they're completely transferable across a number of industries, construction, project management, building, mining, all of those sorts of industries. Even from a technician's point of view, there's the skills again. You've got your trades are very similar. The core set of skills are the same across the board. You might be a welder. You might just need to pick up a different level of weld for a shipbuilding project, and particularly probably for a submarine project where welding is so important. So the core skills are largely the same. There might be just some small little gaps that you might have to fill if you're looking to move between one and the other. Again, we've got, I don't know, there'd be thousands of people working in the trade space out at Techport, and they're in there in the shipyard every day, and they're constantly learning new skills. So there's a chance once you're in there to cross-train, and there's also a chance to do that before you come in to find a position. Things like that are completely out of the ordinary. So we've got an emergency response group out at Techport. Obviously things could go wrong on the ship, and you've got to have that sort of facility there. That's made up of trade staff, so they've had the cross-training in and they're trained by the Metro Fire Service, and all those sorts of things. Those opportunities exist. So completely transferable.
I think it's important to note that something like 80% of the jobs that the defence industry will need will be vet trained. Only about 20% of them will be university trained graduates, which really brings me to you, Penny. The qualifications that you teach.
Yes.
Do you teach welding generically, or do you teach it for shipbuilding?
So the answer to that is we do both. And as the projects come online and as the demand grows from the shipbuilders, we will likely have specialist courses just for those who want to go into welding and shipbuilding. And we'll also be designing specialist assessments that suit the welding procedures that particular shipyard desires. So say for submarines, it's going to be different for frigates.
Okay, I think there was another question there.
Yeah, g'day. You mentioned working with cutting edge technology, but working with AI, do you feel that in the future or in the near future, a lot of these industries will, I guess, be eliminated?
You've been looking at my questions, haven't you? You've been talking about the disruptions that might occur to the industry. And in fact, I guess, if I can just start by answering that myself, I think you'll find that there are many industries that are going to be hit by disruption. If I wouldn't recommend, for example, people decide to be a taxi driver for the rest of their life, because I guess it will be about 5 to 10 years before people won't need to drive cars. And they will just dial up an Uber, if they allow them in South Australia, and it will arrive at your door. You will climb in, tell it where to go, and it will arrive, and then it will go back. And it will be far cheaper than owning your own car. I think the same thing will happen in the defence industry with those things. But perhaps we can talk about disruption. What do you see?
Yeah, I guess we'd have, from my perspective, we'd have a different word for disruption in the defence industry. We'd probably call it competitive edge. So where we're able to get a step ahead by disruptive technology for Australia, that gives us a competitive edge over our adversary. So those are the things, disruptive technologies and AI and those sorts of things are things that we're continually pushing every day to try and incorporate into our designs and into our products so that we do have that advantage. And there's a number of ways that we're doing that, and a lot of the work does go through the Defence Science and Technology Group. So if research is your path into the defence industry, there's a number of jobs in the Defence Science and Technology Group that would help do that. Even little things around the edges that don't directly relate. So Raytheon have a thing called The Cave in Canberra, which is just a bunch of screens, and it's more an augmented reality than a virtual reality type thing, but you can put up the 3D image of the bridge of the ship or any compartment in the ship and get a feeling for what it's like to be in that compartment. So those sorts of things are useful for the customer, for Navy, and for other people to get a feel for what it's like, and that's the sort of technologies, not just in the products, but around the place that we're looking to use. So no, I think it's what we do. It's kind of our business is disruptive technologies.
I think one of the disruptive technologies in the airspace has been drones in the last few years. And effectively those drones have a lot of AI already built in. Not the decision to strike, but in terms of navigating its way over a terrain, it has the smarts to be able to do that right now. The question we've got to ask ourselves is whether that will translate to ships in the future and actually have ships that don't have anybody on them. Question, I have no idea whether that's going to happen, but you can be damn sure that someone's looking at that right now to see whether they will.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be a human element behind artificial intelligence. You've always got to have the designers, you've always got to have the operators, so...
Famous last words there.
Yeah. Yes, it may change the look of the roles within defence, but will it completely wipe it out? No, definitely not. We saw this when manufacturing started to become more robotic and more intelligent. Yes, it changed how we did manufacturing, but we certainly still have the technicians on the shop floor operating those machines. So it's exciting, and the technology that we can do and the things that we can do even now is so exciting. And it'll be fun to watch in the future.
I think Industry 4.0, Penny was talking about the digital shipyards. When we built our building at Tonsley, the whole building was in a 3D CAD model. Not one thing arrived on site that had to be taken off site again to be fixed, because they knew exactly what shape everything is. Buildings are being built that way now. So I think, yes, it will. The other thing I will say is a comment that people have talked about, the term artificial intelligence. I think if you'd gone back 15 years and thought, what would an artificial intelligence phone look like? It would look like this. In 15 years' time, we'll still be talking about artificial intelligence, because the idea of artificial intelligence is in some ways a moving target. But you're absolutely right. The computer scientists will add probably about as much to the defence industry as many hardware engineers will. Yeah?
I'm hearing about technical roles and project management roles. As there are more jobs in those areas, will there also be an increase in the support roles in administration, human resources, and finance?
Yep.
Is there any focus on any of that? Is there any advice you can give to anybody?
Yeah, so I started my career in HR. I did a Bachelor of Management. It's not necessary to get into a HR role. You don't have to have a qualification to get into a HR role. And I actually think it's actually a really, really good starter role for anyone in the company, because to get into that HR role, because you get to know everyone and you get to meet everyone in the company and you get to make relationships. As far as getting into it, I don't know what your experience is, but if you haven't had that experience before, go in for an HR administrator type of role. BAE Systems, for example, has a HR help desk, and that's a fantastic starting place because you get to know the company from a fairly looked after area. But certainly we're hiring admin people all the time. We're going to be needing lots and lots of people to support all of these people. Yeah.
But there are specific requirements for people who want to work in the defence industry in terms of nationality and citizenship. And we're hearing a lot at the moment about politicians being knocked out because of dual citizenship. I don't think the defence industry is that strict, but Brodie?
No, not at all. You just basic requirement and there are roles that you don't need a security clearance for. A lot of those are the support roles that we were just talking about. So there's a bunch of roles. So finance, HR, legal, commercial, IT. These support teams, as the projects get bigger and bigger, there's going to be more and more people. I think, speaking to some of our management staff there, I think the figure for us, for Raytheon on air warfare destroyers, only about 70% of the people are technical staff. So the other 30% are in those support sort of roles. And we have the number of subcontracts that we have to manage is large. There's 164 purchase technical specifications. Each one of those is part of a contract that's just for the platform system, and then there's the combat system that goes with it. There's a lot of support roles involved. For the support roles, maybe not so much a requirement to have a security clearance. For the more technical roles, usually you need to be an Australian citizen. It doesn't generally matter if you're a dual citizen, depending on what your dual or tri-citizenship, which countries they are with. And then there is another requirement generally as well for export controlled material. So some countries don't like their data to be transferred to other countries. And again, that's managed on an ad hoc basis. The main requirement is if you're going to be in a technical role, generally you'll need to hold a security clearance and we'll need an Australian citizenship to do that.
I think one of the other questions I'm often asked is about gender. The defence industry is often seen as male-dominated. My perception is it's changing, but Amanda, your experiences?
I'm not going to lie. It is still very male-dominated. Generally there are more men in the meeting than there are females, but at the same time, a lot of the graduates we see coming through are female. We're getting a lot more attention from the females as well. I think it's not an industry a lot of females dream about working in, and I think that's one of the biggest issues. But it is actually a very, very interesting and diverse industry to work in, and you think of defence industry and you think of the typical engineers and the rocket scientists, and we're getting a lot more of the females coming through those pathways as well. So you're not the only one, and you're not singled out. It's not uncomfortable, and we are seeing more and more. So I think it is getting there, but I won't lie, we are a little bit outnumbered still.
Kenny?
Just some feedback that we've had recently from Jeff Crittenden, who's the Chief Executive of the Welding Technology Institute of Australia, is that women make very good welders because they have that attention to detail and a steady hand. So I'd encourage any women interested in welding to come and have a chat. And we've got one of our welding inspector expert lecturers here as well who can talk to you about that.
Excellent. Other questions? Yeah.
Hi. Has there been an increase or decrease in students' enrollment in engineering programs in, say, for universities?
Over the past few years?
Yeah.
Generally, engineering has gone up. I don't know the numbers for 2018 yet, but at Flinders, we've seen a massive increase. Flinders is the fastest growing engineering department in the country. And engineering numbers have increased quite dramatically. What we are able to do, though, is it doesn't actually matter how many people apply to enter engineering. We can respond, and all 3 universities can respond because we have the flexibility from the government to take as many people as we think will graduate. Now, we do that generally by saying this is the ATAR we expect for a school leaver, and we don't move those ATARs. But generally, if you've got a high 70s, 80s type ATAR, and you have mathematics, I'll pass over to you in a minute, and you have mathematics, you will get into engineering, or you will get into a pathway to engineering. So yes, the numbers have increased, but that shouldn't concern you in terms of your chance of getting in. Your chance of getting in is determined purely by your ability and your competency. Do you want to add anything?
Not a lot.
Because when you went through, there were far fewer engineers going through.
True, yes, absolutely. I think it hasn't changed a lot. We're lucky here in South Australia. All 3 universities offer world-class engineering degrees. I've studied a master's at UniSA. I apologise, John.
That's all right.
Flinders is the only university I haven't been to, but the other 2, and they're slightly different in the way they go about it, if that's fair, I think.
Yep.
The way they structure their engineering degrees is all slightly different, and they focus on a different pathway. So have a look and try and figure out which degree is right for you if that's the way you're headed. But they're all world class, and they all offer a great education. So,
but as I said before, the other thing is that 80% of the jobs aren't going to be university level. They will be at TAFE level. And TAFE's entry qualifications, you still like maths,
yeah,
but you don't require it.
No. So at the Certificate 2 levels in schools, I think the numbers are pretty good at St Patrick's in Certificate 2 engineering, but some other schools there has been a drop-off because of the so-called Valley of Death. There was a feeling that potentially there weren't the opportunities, but the message we really want to get out now to parents and school students is that there will be lots and lots of jobs in engineering, technical areas and apprenticeships, and so now's the time to be getting back into engineering.
we should probably, before too many more people leave, we should probably make that point. The scope for jobs in this state for defence is massive. So the thing for continuous shipbuilding, people have already mentioned, so there's 12 offshore patrol vessels that are planned. A number of those will be built here. Future frigate, 9 future frigates built in South Australia, 12 submarines built in South Australia. And they talk about continuous shipbuilding and the scope of work flowing through and providing that level, that even level of work for years and years to come across all the areas of jobs we've spoken about. And then on top of shipbuilding, there's things like the Woomera test range upgrade, Land 19, which is a project that the Army are running for ground-based air defence, will likely be run out of Adelaide. There's some work on Jindalee over-the-horizon radars on Jawn. So there's a number of projects that the amount of work coming to South Australia in defence is massive.
That's the hardware.
Yeah.
If you then start talking about cybersecurity, then that is a massive growth area for defence. And arguably, our threat level for cybersecurity is above that for those forms where we will need, if you like, an artefact, a tank or a warship to solve the problem. So IT degrees, particularly cybersecurity degrees, network systems degrees, are going to be very popular. And that is going forward. And I think the other question I had was about the valley of death. And you mentioned continuous shipbuilding, and I think it's important to sort of talk about the continuous shipbuilding as being the solution to the valley of death. Could you just explain that?
Absolutely, yeah. So there was, for people who aren't aware, the Valley of Death was this concept that, and historically that was sort of the way shipbuilding was done in Australia, was a large project would ramp up and thousands of people would be highly skilled by the end of this project and built up all this experience, and then there would be no future work, and these people would filter off to mining or to various oil and gas and all these other industries, construction. And then the next project would start up and you'd either get new people or these people would have to come back and relearn certain things, and it was very peak and trophy, you would say. And this concept that the federal government's taken of continuous shipbuilding is to flatten that out and build the workforce and bring the work through so that these people have jobs for life in shipbuilding in Australia if that's what they want to do. And they've taken a number of decisions to help make that happen. Things like the offshore patrol vessels, bringing that program forwards, moving a number of the builds of those ships to Adelaide rather than building them elsewhere in the country, so that the staff here can start work. I think steel cutting for that ship is meant to start next year, so the flow is happening. So that's the idea between on continuous shipbuilding and the problem that it's meant to fix.
And when I go interstate, it is quite clear that the other states are very envious of the amount of money being thrown at South Australia for our shipbuilding. And long may it continue.
Understatement, yeah.
I think in addition to that as well, though, a lot of the companies are learning. And so they're not basing their entire portfolio on just Australian projects. And so a lot of the companies are actually doing a lot of really exciting things with overseas contracts as well. And so there isn't just that reliance on one government and one source of funding. And that's proving to be quite successful. Mm-hmm. So manufacturing in South Australia is working very heavily with the US government and the UK government and their defence industries, and we're getting a lot of work from that. And that's keeping the workforce going as well, in between where we don't have necessarily constant funding.
So the opportunities for travel?
Huge.
You're off
to Spain at the end of this month, so I will be in Spain for a month, working on the shipyard with one of our subcontractors. And
I have to say that within the defence industry, about 1 in every 2 people I meet at the moment is learning to speak French. So you wonder why. Okay, any other questions? Yes.
My question is twofold. So the first is, are there actually jobs now, like an increase in jobs now, or are you seeing this more as an opportunity to educate yourself in a different field in order to be ready when the jobs ramp up? So for me, where I'm at the moment, I'm a professional, I've been working in it for 9 years, and I can see that my skill set could be useful in these sorts of fields, but potentially I could expand on it with the engineering draftsperson addition to the skills I've already got. So I'm kind of going, do I apply for jobs now, or do I do a course and then apply? So that's the first question, is are there jobs now?
both. is the answer. There is so many jobs going at the moment. There is a lot of work being thrown around by the SA government as well, and that is, you know, the amount of ships that are coming in. So everyone's ramping up. All the defence companies are ramping up at the moment to try and get ready for when these announcements are made. These announcements are expecting to be made within the next 6 months and further, and so there will be another ramp-up period then as well.
So we've already going up like this, and in 6 months it's going to go like that.
That's the graph I've seen. And what I will say in terms of your choice is that part-time study is a great way of adding, and in fact, I don't think you'd, as a professional engineer or a professional computer scientist or professional project manager, you don't get away with saying, okay, I've got my degree now, I can stop learning. Getting extra qualifications. Otherwise, what will happen is along will come some kind of disruption, and you're yesterday's girl. So yeah.
And a lot of these big companies will actually support you for training as well. I was supported to do my master's. They actually paid for half of it for me. So getting in with these big companies is fantastic.
Which leads into the second aspect of the question, which is there isn't one place to look for these jobs, is it? You have to be making yourself known to each of the individual companies like Redfin, like BAU, in order to be able to do job search that way.
These sorts of events are great for this because you can walk around and the people downstairs are recruiters. We haven't sent the tech people, we haven't sent necessarily the project managers, we've sent the recruiters. So this sort of event is absolutely perfect to get your name out there. There's lots of trade shows and that sort of thing that a lot of the public can come to afterwards as well. These sorts of events are fantastic, but yes, get your name in with the individual companies as well.
The trade shows are trying to sell their product, so then you get the techie people coming along to them. But these ones, they're looking for people like you. So, yes, question.
Yeah, thanks. I think I know the answer to this question, but I'd just like to dispel a myth. I've heard, when I've talked to other people I know about defence jobs, they've kind of said, to get in, you've got to, get to a certain level of fitness. I tried to join the Air Force, 5 years ago, and I couldn't get my fitness level up, that kind of thing. I assume that apart from the operational areas, it's not like that. Is that correct?
No. Brodie here is fit as anything, but I have wandered around watching some of these people build, particularly the IT guys. Fanta Coke cans on one side, pizza boxes on the other, cybersecurity terminal. No, but yes, you're right. Getting into the army, you probably do need a level of fitness that I would have failed as well.
One thing you probably should know though is if you're climbing in and out of the ship constantly, you're going to be doing a lot of stairs, so you're going to be getting your fitness up quite quickly anyway.
In relation to some of the welding, there is some confined space stuff where you might have to lie on your back with a mirror and that type of thing, so possibly not that role for you.
Okay, one final question, yeah.
A little bit similar to my previous question, but on the trade side, you mentioned welding and electricians, and I can't remember if you mentioned any other trades, but are there any other generalist or support trades that might find work in the Defence Force during this growth period? For example, the fellow here is a carpenter and a general tradie of many, many years' experience, but he is not a professional welder, although he can weld, nor an electrician. Are there generalist tradie roles out there?
And some of the shipbuilders are very open to cross-skilling tradespeople. I know Offshore, for example, is very keen on that, so I suggest you go and talk to them about opportunities. Yeah.
All right, we'll do that. Thank you.
The opportunities aren't necessarily all with the big companies. There's so many subcontractors, as I was alluding to before. We have a group called Taylor Brothers that does all the fit out for the ships. Certainly, I'm sure that there's some requirement for carpenters in those sorts of roles. All the fit outs for particularly the living spaces, the messes, the bunks, they're all prefab. They're all done on site at Taylor Brothers, and then they come onto the shipyard. So some of these supporting and the feeding companies, you hear a lot about the overall numbers for the big primes, but the supporting industries that are needed to support a shipbuilding industry in SA is huge as well. So there's jobs in all of those feeder sort of companies and industries.
Just give you an example. For every one person working in terms of mining engineering, they needed 10 people in building and construction, building the infrastructure around a mine site. So if you thought that the mining industry was going to create a boon for mining engineers, you'd be better off doing civil engineering than you were mining engineering. And I think the same. And the other thing I think with defence is sometimes it's your attitude that they actually seek out first. And because they can always send you off to a TAFE course to learn TIG welding, or send you off to a project management course to get your master's in project management. But if your attitude is right, if you're eligible in terms of your citizenship and that sort of thing, then you're halfway there already. Okay, I think we've just about run out of time, but I'd like you to join me in thanking our panellists.